a little more detail about some of the interesting non-Uthmanic, I will call them, variants that I found in this manuscript. So in Q7, verse 142, there's the verse وَأَتْمَمْنَاهَا. Okay, وَأَتْمَمْنَاهَا is the standard Uthmanic reading. This is the canonical text. And here we have وَتَمَّمْنَاهَا and a later alif that was added. And this is just an emphatic change in morphology here. But what's interesting is one might say, well, how do we know that the scribe didn't just forget the alif? So the scribe meant to write وَتَمَّمْنَاهَا, or وَأَتْمَمْنَاهَا, pardon, and they just forgot to write the alif. Lucky for us, we can see that the scribe actually initially wrote an alif. So you can see the remnant of the alif, and then they scraped it away, and then they wrote تَمَّمْنَاهَا. And someone later on added the alif in here. And so what that tells me, at least, is that the scribe was copying from an exemplar that had an alif in it, but consciously decided to erase it and go with a non-standard reading وَتَمَّمْنَاهَا. Now, if you go through the traditional literature, you'll find that this variant is attributed to Ubay ibn Kab. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But then a couple verses later, we have بِأَحْسَنِهَا, in the feminine right here, and we can see here this ha and alif was added in later, and we can see the outline of an original ha that was here. So what was written was bi-ahsanih in the masculine. Now, if you go through the traditional literature, you find this variant mentioned that it was read وَقُرِئَ بِأَحْسَنِهِ, or in this manuscript it would be بِأَحْسَنِهُ بِغَيْرِ أَلِفٍ عَلَى التَّذْكِيرِ in the masculine. But there was no reference to who read this, so it was not attributed to anyone. Interestingly, again, one verse later, we have this word يَتَّخِذُوهُ, which was originally written as يَتَّخِذُوهَا. We can see in the feminine, we can see the remnant of the alif, and the shape, the letter shape of this ha is not of a word final detached ha right here. This is an initial ha right there. Interestingly enough, this variant is also attributed to Ubay ibn Kab. Now, this brings up a broader question, which is the question of companion readings. Are these readings really the readings of companions, or are they back projections onto famous companions who did have dissenting readings compared to the canonized Uthmanic, what we call the Uthmanic standard muṣḥaf? Ultimately, without a more exhaustive study, it's impossible to say. But what I will say is, in this case, what we find is a uniformity of attribution to Ubay, a very small sample size. But the other interesting thing we'll see is that this mushaf does have a Syrian provenance. Not only was it found in a Syrian deposit, but there are other Syrian elements of this mushaf. And Ubay's reading was recorded to have been popular in the Syrian region before the proliferation of the standardized Uthmanic recension. And so I just find that curious. I think the jury's still out. A lot of research has to be done on this, but I just point this out because it's very interesting. Now, as far as I'm aware, no one has systematically collected from the earliest manuscripts. I have a running list going, actually, of companion readings that are found, or so-called companion readings that are found in the earliest Quranic manuscripts, and they do die out over time. So they do fall out of favor as the Uthmanic manuscript, or the Uthmanic standard edition, becomes more and more prevalent. But interestingly, another manuscript that I'm currently studying and working on an edition of is Arabe 331. This is a bit later, late 1st century, early 2nd century manuscript. Beautiful Kufic B1A manuscript. And here you can see in Surah Al-Baqarah Q2, فَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ. So the standard reading has bi-mithl, and in fact here it's not even vocalized as bi-mithl, but you can clearly see someone came in later on and added the bi-mithl in here, or bi-mithli. And if you go through the literature, you find many reports, actually not one, but in many of the earliest books, Abu Ubaid, I'm not sure about Al-Farra, but very early, at least late 2nd century attributions of this reading to IbnʿAbbās, where it is said that IbnʿAbbās disapproved of the Uthmanic reading of if they believe in what is like what you have believed in, bi-mithli mā āmantum bih. And he said that lā taqra, or do not read, bi-mithl mā āmantum bih, like that which you have believed in, because God has no mathīl, there is nothing like God. But rather you should read فَإِنْ āmanū bimā āmantum bih. So if they believe in what you believed in. Now this particular variant, very clearly this was intended by the scribe of this manuscript. It's also purported to have been read by Anas ibn Mālik, the famous companion, and also Ibn Masʿūd. Again, I just want to highlight this to the general audience here, to just present to them that this is an open question right now, and a very fascinating area of study. And the closest thing I've seen to this was Yassine Dutton has a paper that came out in 2017 that was titled "When Do the Shawādh Become Shadh?" Something like that. He doesn't quite look at companion readings, but he entertains the question of the fact of the matter is, the earlier the manuscript, the more we find these sort of little remnants of non-Uthmanic variants in them, and they slowly die out. And so when were these variants considered to really be non-canonical and unacceptable to have in manuscripts? And again, it's an open question.